Welcome Trinidad and Tobago to our News 4 report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. I'm Nicola Barreto. Let's take a look at the headlines. Trinidad and Tobago to participate in America's Competitiveness Forum in Panama this week. Communication Minister says Colm Imbert's attack on Canada is damaging to Trinidad and Tobago. And TTEI first published report illustrates revenue transparency and accountability in the extractive sectors. Thank you for joining us to our top story. Trinidad and Tobago will participate in America's Competitiveness Forum in Panama this week. It's expected that Prime Minister the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar will lead a contingent to the high-profile event, which looks at creative ways at promoting economic competitiveness.
Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar will lead a delegation to the America's Competitiveness Forum in Panama this week. The ACF Forum is part of the Inter-American Competitiveness Network, RIAC, while the event is said to be the Western Hemisphere's preeminent event for government and business leaders to discuss innovative methods to achieve economic competitiveness and promote innovation in the Americas. The international gathering seeks to enable private and public sector representatives to take advantage of creative opportunities to explore new business models and expand their businesses. ACF brings together more than 1,000 leaders from 34 nations of the Americas, including heads of state, cabinet members, business executives, trade delegates, academics, and representatives from the region's public and private competitiveness councils, non-governmental and international organizations. The ACF provides a platform for dialogue on ways to enhance the region's ability to compete more successfully in the current economic context. The theme for the 2013 forum is Infrastructure and Technology Shaping Countries Today. During the period of the forum, a number of plenary sessions will be held which will look at improving regional overview of infrastructure and logistics focused on the achievements, the challenges, and areas of opportunity. Macroeconomic challenges which will focus on creative methods to invest in infrastructure of the future while maintaining macroeconomic stability. The challenge of the region as it relates to education, which will focus on infrastructure for education, and the global perspective on infrastructure policy. It's expected that Trinidad and Tobago will host the 8th America's Competitiveness Forum in 2014. And the attendance of the Prime Minister at the forum in Panama will facilitate the transition ceremony as chair pro tempore of RIAC 2014. Additionally, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar will lead a delegation that is traveling to Panama for the signing of the partial scope trade agreement between Trinidad and Tobago and Panama. The Prime Minister and the Panamanian President will witness the signing at 9 a.m. on Thursday. Minister of Foreign Affairs Winston Dukuran and Ambassador Mervyn Assam will be in attendance. Kimberly Ramkalawan, News 4.
Communication Minister Senator the Honorable Gerald Hadid says Colm Imbert's attack on Canada is damaging the country. This statement came following the opposition MP's reference to the Canadian High Commissioner Gerard Latulippe in the Parliament. The minister said in a release that by attacking and wrongfully accusing the official representative of the Canadian government of improper practices, Colm Imbert has created a diplomatic mess with far-reaching negative repercussions for our country.
This was the view of Minister of Communication, the Honorable Gerard Hadid, to what he termed the unwarranted, unjustified and inaccurate accusations made by Mr. Imbert in Parliament last Friday, when he claimed that Canadian High Commissioner Gerard Latulippe resigned in 1987 from his post of Solicitor General of Quebec because of improper practices. The minister said, according to the Express, Mr. Latulippe was deeply offended by opposition MP Colm Imbert's personal attack on him in Parliament last Friday. The Canadian High Commissioner said that Imbert's speech was irresponsible and had tarnished him personally as well as his reputation as a representative of the Canadian government. Explaining the situation, Mr. Latulippe said he wanted the democratic institutions to be completely free to investigate whether the contracts were given according to the law. He said after he resigned, a parliamentary committee was appointed to investigate the matter and found every contract was granted correctly and according to rules. High Commissioner Latulippe said the experience was one of the worst of his life, and after that he decided to leave politics. Commenting further on the situation, Minister Hadid stressed The Canadian High Commissioner said he had invited Mr. Imbert to a meeting to discuss the SNC-Lavalin situation, and Mr. Imbert refused. Mr. Imbert had the opportunity to ask for the truth and get Mr. Latulipe's side of the story, instead of relying on Google. Asked about the political fallout from Mr. Imbert's accusations, the Communication Minister added, open quote, "I agree with the High Commissioner that freedom of expression, even under parliamentary immunity, bears responsibility and respect for human rights. What is worse is that many of our people living in Canada have been calling to say that Mr. Imbert's irresponsibility could cost this country the support of the Canadian government, and other governments who, seeing what has happened to the Canadian representative, may feel the same way or worse could happen to them." End quote. Mr. Hadid further said, open quote, "This kind of irresponsibility has always caused us problems. What Mr. Imbert and his colleagues don't seem to realize is that in trying to discredit us, they are doing immeasurable damage to our country, its allies, and our international reputation." End quote. Joseph Lopez, News 4.
When we come back, TTEI-TI's first report released. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Ministry of Energy received the first report from the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative today, detailing accountability of government revenue from the energy sector during fiscal year 2011. Chairman of the Steering Committee at the TTEI-TI, Victor Hart, says the report signals a shift in transparency in Trinidad and Tobago.
A huge step in accountability of government spending of revenue. That's how Chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Steering Committee, Victor Hart, is describing the first published report it presented to the Ministry of Energy. The aim of the organization seeks to promote revenue transparency and accountability in the extractive sectors. It requires public disclosure of the total payments made by the extractive companies to the government, which are independently reconciled with the government's declared receipts. Any discrepancies in both figures are independently audited and the results are made public. The first report highlights government's fiscal year 2011 and the revenue collected from each energy company associated with contributing to the nation's revenue. In speaking at the handover ceremony, Mr. Hart says this will position Trinidad and Tobago on the Transparency Global Map.
Government's decision to implement the EITI and reconcile payments and revenues via a multi-stakeholder system signals a commitment by the government to good governance, improves the international credibility of the government, and affirms its commitment to fight corruption. An improved investment climate results from government's clear signal to investors that it is committed to strengthen transparency and accountability over natural resources revenues, and we can expect to see an increase in direct foreign investment.
The report represents over 20 companies in the oil and gas sector participating in the reporting exercise for this period fiscal 2011 after having signed the Memorandum of Understanding for the implementation of the Institute in June this year. Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarayanan, receiving the report, described it as building trust among its partners in the industry.
For the participating companies, it has meant their voluntary agreement to a mechanism to waive the confidentiality provision in their contracts and to the wide publication of their payment information. And I would add that a number of the companies that are resident and operating in Trinidad and Tobago today are actually founding members of the EITI. That all this was achieved through dialogue and cooperation amongst the three stakeholder groups. And by the three stakeholder groups, we refer to the government being one stakeholder, industry being the second stakeholder group, and the third stakeholder group being civil society. That all this was achieved through dialogue and cooperation amongst three stakeholder groups is a testimony to the adoption of the best principles of the EITI process, which seeks to bring light rather than heat to the discussion of the management of the country's natural resources.
Trinidad and Tobago is the 35th nation out of 39 to implement this type of EITI reporting. This report, however, focuses on key areas, including recommendations to both government and energy companies on tracking revenue and taxes through proper auditing.
At the commencement of the reconciliation process, the initial unreconciled difference between the reported payments was 1.1 billion TT dollars, or 5% of the reported government revenue. The reconciliation process entails summarizing differences noted and providing details to both government and companies for investigation and querying. Supporting documentation in the form of receipts, return checks, wire transfers, etc. were obtained to justify adjustments.
The Energy Minister expressed confidence in the report, pushing greater management of this country's natural resources.
From a governance perspective, I expect EITI reporting to bring about a greater level of public engagement and discussion about the management of the country's natural resources. 5 years from now, I expect the public discussion about the independent assessment of our revenue, of our collection of energy sector revenues, to form as much part of the national lexicon as the Ryder Scott report, which, as you know, Ryder Scott now, as I've told the guys from Ryder Scott is now a household name in Trinidad and Tobago.
Conducting of the report is subjected to an independent audit to reconcile the differences and the results published and widely disseminated. This first report published is set to be available for public viewing. Kimberly Ramkalawan, News 4.
In other news, community centres to be built in Trinidad and Tobago will now subscribe to a fixed model that the Cabinet has agreed upon.
All community centres across Trinidad and Tobago will be built to a standard architectural design. This was revealed by Minister of Community Development, the Honourable Winston Peters, on Thursday at the post-Cabinet news briefing. The Honourable Minister said the request for the standardised architecture had been around for some time.
When we got into government and I got into the Ministry of Community Development, you find that every community centre that had to be built, there was a different design. So when I got there were 12 designs for different community centers. And I don't think that that was very, tenable. So we decided to come to Cabinet for standardization, and Cabinet has agreed.
The Honourable Minister says the estimated cost to construct a community centre using this model is $12 million and will deliver an 11,000 square foot structure valued at $8 million, which is at an industrial rate of $740 per square foot. He said the one-story building will also come with a tank farm, which is a recommendation of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, so that the centre will be able to accommodate persons during an emergency. Minister Peters revealed that Cabinet further approved the allocation of close to $19 million to complete 5 community centres across the country, which are at different stages of completion. The centres to be completed are the Karapu, Mount Hope, Mount Lambert, Talparo, Ottawa and Cleaver Hill community centres. Meanwhile, the Honourable Minister spoke of another community centre that will be completed by his ministry.
Cabinet has agreed to the rebuilding of the Lassavan Community Centre on a parcel of land vested in the name of the Lassavan Village Council, situated at Warwick Street in Newlands Village, and that is in Guayaguayari.
The minister said the Ministry of Community Development entered into an agreement with the Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprise Limited to provide procurement, project management and contract management services for the construction of the community centre. This centre, according to the minister, may be the first to be rolled out using the standard architecture design. Nikolai Edwards, News 4.
When we come back, the Red Force brings down the Titans. Stay with us. Trinidad and Tobago's much vaunted T20 bowling attack came in for some stick when they faced the Titans of South Africa in the Champions League. But the Red Force still managed to a much-needed win via the Duckworth-Lewis method because the batsmen finally showed up. Wayne Cunningham has more in this report.
A 109-run partnership between Darren Bravo and Evan Lewis helped Trinidad and Tobago to 188 for 6 in their 20 overs as they took on the Titans in a must-win encounter in the Carbon Smart Champions League T20. It was the most impressive batting performance to date for TNT, and they must have fancied their chances of beating the South African side and thus keeping hope alive for grabbing a spot in the semi-finals. But a win for the Titans would guarantee them a place in the Final Four, and they put on 65 in just 6.4 overs to make a match of it. Riyad Emirates got a breakthrough for the Red Force when he bowled the Titans captain Henry Davids for 42 in the 7th over. Lindell Simmons and Samuel Badri stemmed the flow of runs a bit in the middle overs, and this put the pressure on the batting side to keep up with the run rate. Badri getting Hino Kuhn to sky 1 to Evan Lewis at mid-wicket. Simmons then accounted for the dangerous Jacques Rudolph with the help of Emirates in the 11th over. From 88 for 3 to 88 for 4, as Simmons got Roelof van der Meer to hold out to Bravo in the deep. The Titans were not going away though. The 15th over was a horrid one for TNT fans, as the combination of Farhan Bahadeen and A.B. de Villiers took 22 runs off Riyad Emirates to keep interest in the game. Red Force captain Dinesh Ramdin then made the game-winning move by bringing back ace spinner Sunil Narayan, and he gets Bahadeen to put one straight into the hands of Lewis. Two balls later, and without a run added, David Weiss was heading back to the dugout, caught by Badri off Narayan. The Titans must have thought, with de Villiers still there, they always had a chance. But the weather had different ideas. Because with 3 overs remaining and 34 runs needed, it got torrential. Rain eventually ending the match, which was decided by the Duckworth-Lewis method, giving Trinidad and Tobago the win by 6 runs. And with the other game in Group B between the Brisbane Heat and Sunrisers Hyderabad totally rained out, the Red Force has one leg through the door to the semi-finals. Wayne Cunningham, News 4 Sports.
News 4 continues after the break. Stay with us. The children of Chaguanas are shining examples to other children of the nation. This comes as the Chaguanas Bar Corporation hosted a ceremony for students who excelled in the 2013 SEA and CAPE examinations.
Celebration of young people in the central region and by extension the country. Chaguanas Mayor Orlando Nagesa addressed guests at the function. He said this award ceremony commemorates something good and great.
You don't get an award for playing the fool. You don't get an award for laziness. You don't get an award for unpunctuality and lack of humility and so on. You get an award when something is done that gladdens the heart of not only your parents, but your teachers, society, the community in which you live.
He noted the high degree of success in this year's SEA exam, saying that this year was a great year in education, especially in the central region.
The Minister of Education has said that the performance in the SEA exam was one of the best in years. Children are performing better because probably how they're exposed to not only technology, but parents are more conscious. The home is paying more attention to education and so on. And you have excelled because of that aspect.
There was also entertainment in the form of song. Sharice Lachman sang Whitney Houston's ever popular, The Greatest Love of All.
Everybody searching for a hero. People need someone to look up to. I never found anyone who fulfilled my need. A lonely place to be, and so I learned to depend on me. I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. If I fail, if I succeed, at least I'm living I believe.
Member of Parliament for Couva North, Ramona Ramdale, also gave remarks. She said education is fundamental for the overall development of all in Trinidad and Tobago. She adds that every child has an inherent right to education, regardless of gender, ethnic, social, or economic background.
Every child has the ability to learn. The educational system of Trinidad and Tobago must endeavor to develop a spiritually, morally, physically, intellectually, and emotionally sound individual. The parent, the home, and the community have a major responsibility for the welfare of the child.
She said the People's Partnership Plan for Education identified 3 major goals that aim at enhancing and consolidating efforts in the pursuit of improved access, equity, and quality of education for improved student outcomes. The Central Region has always stood out in Trinidad and Tobago with its rich history and continues to provide for the rest of our nation significant economic, academic, political, and cultural inspirations and attributes. Joseph Lopez, News 4.
Well, that's how we wrap up this edition of One News 4 Report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. I'm Nicola Barreto. Thank you for joining us.